Well, greetings and welcome to 6 Good Minutes. My name is Todd Nelson. I'm one of the pastors at First United Methodist Church in Lexington, Kentucky. And welcome and thank you for being here. Every Thursday we spend a couple minutes talking about something that's good, and hopefully my prayer is something that would also be helpful. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, the Apostle Paul writes, "There is great gain in godliness with contentment." Godliness and contentment. Now, godliness, I did a little research for us this week, is conforming to the laws and wishes of God. It's being devout with moral uprightness. Paul says that when you combine leading a life that is aligned with the laws and the wishes of God, coupled with contentment, what you have is this great mix for a gain that is an eternal gain. It's good for you, it's good for me, it's good for everybody. Which tells us there can be some times that we act devoutly or godly or pursue godliness that is not coupled with contentment and doesn't lead to this sort of gain. For instance, you may have experienced someone who has been godly as a way to impress others. Or maybe they're devout in order to seek approval or manipulate a situation. So I'm going to act godly in some way so I can manipulate the situation and gain some sort of temporal benefit for myself. That's not what Paul's saying. Paul's saying that's using godliness in a way that is not honoring, not respectful, and does not receive the gifts of God. Godliness can also be used, if you will, as a way to cover up guilt or somehow earn our favor from a past mistake. And here's the deal. When we act godly because somehow we feel guilty about something in the past, we eventually will burn out trying to be good. You see, when we just simply act godly because of something that's happened in the past that we feel guilty about, we eventually become bitter because it's not helping us, and even maybe have some self-doubt that show up. But godliness with contentment, that's what we're after, actually what God is after in us. Contentment is the state of happiness and satisfaction. And we know from Sermon on the Mount that this word happy can also be translated as blessed. And so contentment is this gift from God. So we need to first acknowledge that it is some desire from God for us to be content, to be in a state of happiness with satisfaction. So how can we develop contentment in our lives? That's the key, I think. First of all, we need to acknowledge that it's difficult. We tend to not find contentment. We have many things that are acting upon our lives that we may not even realize that are leading us to discontentment. I mean, first of all, we live in a culture that says we're supposed to compete with one another. That it's a zero-sum game. You lose, so I win, or if I lose, you win. There's a problem with that, isn't it? Secondly, we also live in this society that compares everyone against everyone all the time. You add to that a false sense in a theology that says things must get better and better continuously, or there's something wrong with us. And all of a sudden you have this great noxious mix that does not lead to contentment, but actually leads you directly to discontentment. The key then to seek contentment is to get off this merry-go-round of competition, comparison, and unrealistic expectations. And in their place, put love of neighbor, love of God, and even love of self in there. Allow God to teach you how to love yourself well. It sounds easy for sure. And it's particularly difficult because so much of our self-esteem tends to be wrapped up in our work. We identify with what we do. Sometimes our self-esteem is wrapped up in our family's success or our standing in the community or how we're perceived. So I'm not saying this is an easy thing for us simply to be content. There's many things that we have to think about, many layers of this onion that need to be peeled back. But here's 3 things that I think you can do immediately, starting right now, that can begin to help us find contentment. First of all, instead of compete against one another, collaborate. This life is too difficult to do it on our own. So let's look for places where we can be with some other people and to do some things alongside them and collaborate instead of compete. Secondly, instead of comparing ourselves against others, celebrate them. Celebrate them. Point out what is going really well in their lives and how it's contributing to your life and the common good of the community, instead of trying to figure out how we're less than someone else who has great gifts. Why don't we just lift them up and celebrate them? And finally, let's develop expectations based on God's promises and not our desires or felt needs. That would go a long ways of developing contentment. Refuse to compete, instead collaborate. Refuse to compare, instead celebrate. And let's begin to build our lives on God's promises and not on some false sense of our own needs or what society tells us is best. I pray that you will find what you're looking for, and God's promise is that we're looking for Him. We will always find Him because He will be faithful. And our godliness, the way we're forming our lives in His laws and in His ways, coupled with contentment, will lead to a gain that will make a difference in your life and the life of everyone around you. I pray that you have a great week, and I will see you soon.